All right, well, today we are going to finish out the book of Esther, and I apologize for looking like I'm crying. I actually have really bad eye allergies this time of year. I know I look like a single girl watching a Nicholas Sparks movie, but it's just allergies, I promise. But we're going to finish out the book of Esther because chapter 10, the final chapter, only has 2 verses. And so we're going to talk about both of them together and finish that out today. And you'll have a working knowledge of the book of Esther. So in Esther chapter 9, is really just the Jews standing up for themselves and taking account of who that they had to defend themselves from and who they had to kill to defend themselves. And then after that, it says on the 15th day they rested. On the 14th and 15th day they rested and had a feast of Purim. And so the reason that it's called that, it talks about in chapter 9, is because Pur is the lot. And so Haman cast the lot about which day to kill the Jews on. So they call it Purim, to the Feast of Purim, to celebrate the fact that they were saved from the annihilation because of God's sovereign hand. And then in chapter 10, those 2 verses are just talking about how Mordecai really spreads the gospel of the Jewish people to those around him because everybody loves him. So everybody likes him. He does a great job. And so he has an impact in the nation he's in, his countrymen, as well as in the Jewish community. And they send out the letters, he and Esther do, to make sure that everybody, every Jewish person, celebrates the Feast of Purim, to celebrate the stopping of the annihilation of the Jews. So that's still a recognized festival today that the Jewish people do recognize. They do celebrate that. So that's the book of Esther, kind of spelled out, chapters 1 through 10. Now, as you look at Esther, there are a couple of main truths that you can see. Number one is God always keeps his promises. So God had promised back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that he would preserve his people through their seed, that the Jewish people would always be protected, and that he would always have a remnant of Jewish people that he would protect. So you can see that, obviously, through Esther's entering into the king, Esther doing all these things. Sorry about the yawn. Doing all these things to make sure that everything was set up for this to happen. God's promises were kept. He protects his people. But you can also see that God is sovereign, that God was in control and working in the situation, even in times when it didn't feel like it. When Esther was being treated like a prostitute for the king's pleasure to see if he wanted to marry her, it didn't feel like that was God's sovereign plan or that God was working in this plan. It wasn't God's plan for that to happen to her. But when it did, God can use these bad things to work out for good, such as saving the entire Jewish race. So the point for us today is this. There's 2 things. Number one, God is sovereign in your life, in mine. And so the things that happen today, whether good or bad, God can use to shape you for who you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to do. So keep that in mind when you make your choices about what to do today, that you want to follow what God wants you to do and ask him what he wants you to do before making that decision. But then also in chapter 10, as Mordecai gives out the gospel and people turn to God because of who he is and what he's saying, the question then becomes, do we have that type of impact in our community or in our school or in our family, that people will see God in us, see Christ in us so much that they will turn to him because of the impact that our lives have on them? Those are the encouraging thoughts, and that is the book of Esther.